Hey everyone, apologies for the lapse in pods and weekly wraps. I'm actually kicking up my heels this week in London, which is a city very near and dear to me. I was a student here a few decades ago. I'm clearly enjoying myself too much, and it's also a much needed break from the pressure cooker in which I live. But I couldn't let any more time go by. I was really keen to speak with our regular guest and good friend of the podcast, Katz, to send out an update to you, dear subscribers, on, well, a lot, almost everything. This is a full body scan of the Israeli body and security politic. Hamas, Hezbollah, Lebanon, Iran, the West Bank, Trump, Bibi, Gvir, Smotrich, you name it, we deal with it. We even discuss the building momentum towards the Israeli election that must be held before October 27th of this year, and the domestic political shenanigans are quite something. I'm Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel. Let's do this. Sunday, May 31st. Gosh, it's just after noon in London where I am, making it just after 2 p.m. in Jerusalem, where you are, Katz. Nice to see you.
Great to be with you.
Another day in paradise?
I mean, basically.
I started quoting you. It's a great
Yeah.
line. Great line. It just kind of rolls off the tongue when you're there. So obviously I'm not there. I'm taking a little time out. It's a bit of a mix of pleasure and some pain, but mostly pleasure. And London remains to the tourist a fantastic city.
And by the way, contrary, I think London gets a bad rap because I was there a few weeks ago and people are like, but what about the Muslims? What about the Arabs? And what about the pro-Palestinians? And the truth is, if you're just minding your own business and you're just going about your day, it's a great city to visit. It really is.
But there's also, I won't get into it here, but the Metropolitan Police have really gotten their act together in the last few months. I actually spent some time, of course, talking to, they have these roving kind of vans, and say there are about 10, 12 police officers attached to each van. It's a facial recognition van. They move around all over London. This one happened to be in central London. And they immediately scan the face of every single person who walks by into their bank of 12,000 wanted individuals. Within seconds, they are scanned and then followed. I watched them apprehend someone that day. It's around 4 or 5 p.m. in the afternoon that day when I was speaking to these incredible police officers, and they were telling me that that day they had already apprehended 8 or 9. It's considered to be a very successful program, and it has become necessary to quote them directly in the last 2 years because of what has been going on in the streets. They can identify with about, he said, a 45% accuracy. So if someone walked by, even masked and with glasses, they can map that face with a 45% accuracy. It goes higher and higher, of course, the more it's visible. And
That's Big Brother.
yes, it is. And it's a big brother that, frankly, I'm like, I said to him, I was kind of hoping you'd kind of pull me over when I went by, but you didn't. It was fascinating. And they were very forthcoming. And it was clear what they were talking about. And it's making a difference. And I have to say, anecdotally, on that day, it was a beautiful day, sunny day, very busy in central London. I was all around that kind of Leicester Square, Regent Park-ish area. And I did not see a single flag. I did not see a single hateful sign. I did not see a single keffiyeh.
Right.
So I'll leave it there.
Exactly. No, I had the same experience a couple weeks ago. Yeah.
But I just, if Toronto police are watching or listening, you might want to pick up the phone and have a chat with your peers at the Met in London. But let's talk about paradise, shall we?
Sure.
Because, of course, as we were just chatting earlier before we went to turn on the record, being out of Israel, this level of tension that completely saturates every fiber of your being just kind of slips away, takes a day or two. And you realize suddenly, oh, I'm not hardwired into everything every moment. I'm not breathing in every political gesture, move, disaster, but I'm still aware. And I want to do a really good kind of, situation report here, like a really good overview with you, Yaakov, because there's so much going on. And I assure everyone who's listening and watching, we're going to get to it all, okay? But it might take a little time. Let's start, and you do this in whatever order you want. I'm going to throw out, it's like a game show now. We're going to save domestic politics for later, but right now I want to throw out some big picture kind of security slash war issues. Hamas, still strong. Israel now saying they're going to occupy 70% of the Gaza Strip. The West Bank sounds like, from what I can access, Jewish terror. And I make that comment with a degree of caution, of course, because no one has been apprehended even on terror charges. But based on what I'm reading about what they're up to, sure sounds like terror to me, and they are Jewish. And for some reason, never seem to be apprehended. We have in the north a situation that for a few weeks now, the government has been telling the residents up there they are living in a ceasefire zone, whereas they are living, in their view, in a war zone, constantly being pelted by rockets and missiles, and it's surreal. And the army and the government at the highest levels ignore them. And of course, Iran. Is Trump still doing his Hamlet thing? And what, if anything, is the kind of situation between Trump and Bibi? Are they still hand in glove? Or is there a dissonance there? Is there a kind of divergence now of national interests and interests generally? And, many people have been saying, oh, that, Trump's throwing Bibi under the bus. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of those in the order in which you choose to tackle them.
Well, first of all, there's a lot to unpack. And there's a lot to unpack because the situation, well, it seems like it changes to some extent. It's very much, I feel like Israel is kind of stuck on all of those different fronts that you talked about. We have a situation that is very volatile, but also without real resolution that I can see on the horizon and say, okay, if we just do this or if we just do that, we will solve this. We will eliminate the enemy. We will defeat the enemy. We will create long-term stability, whatever language you want to use. I mean, we look at Gaza, for example, right? So just in the last 15 days or so, Israel killed this guy, Izzadin, whatever his name was, who was the head of the Hamas military wing over the last year or so. 10 days later, they killed his successor. But you can be sure that his successor already has a successor, and that successor already has a successor. And our situation with Gaza right now is basically a two-pronged approach. More territory, right? This is the Israeli version right now. This is the Israeli strategy, Vivian, on every front, by the way. More territory and more attacks, eliminations, targeted killings, destruction. Political resolution, you won't see anywhere, right? Real political resolution. So with Gaza, there's no, Hamas is in control 50% of the Gaza Strip. Hamas is rearming. Hamas is rebuilding. What's the answer? Okay, we got to go from 50% to 70%. We have to kill now this guy, that guy, and the next guy, and keep up that strategy. Lebanon, we're stuck in Lebanon, right? There was a ceasefire that was supposed to have gone into effect already last November, right? November of a year and a half ago, almost. Then that kind of exploded with the Iran war now. Hezbollah started its rocket fire. We went into Lebanon in a deeper way, got to the Litani River. Now we've crossed the Litani River. Now we are at the very symbolic Beaufort line. Beaufort, just for our listeners and viewers, is a Crusade era fort that's on a high point within southern Lebanon, but in the Israeli military, it has almost mythological significance. People romanticize about the Beaufort. There's movies been made and books have been written and people who have, told there's been incredible heroism and courage and displays of it all in different battles that have taken place there over the years. But it is, on the one hand, it's deep inside Lebanon. It's a place that the IDF held on to back when it had the security zone at the time, up until 2000. But it's also a place where a lot of Israeli soldiers found their deaths and a lot of battles that were fought that really never changed reality. So again, in Lebanon, what's the solution to the Hezbollah's expanding rocket fire, which is now going to Nahariya and into Carmiel and towards Tzfat and other places, not just Kiryat Shmona, Metula, and the northern line? Again, more territory. Go deeper into Lebanon. expand our territorial control, strike in the Dachi of Beirut, strike in Tyre, strike in other places. So you kind of see the common theme here, right? We don't know what to do. So, in the absence of having some plan, the plan is simple: territorial expansion and continued military incursions and strikes. Iran is maybe the, what you say in Hebrew, the Yotzei Dofen, the one that's kind of out of the ordinary or the outlier here, because Iran, there is no territorial control that we could talk about. And we pretty much, even if we wanted to attack right now, there's nothing that we can do because we have to wait to see what Donald Trump is going to decide. So right now, that's also kind of a waiting. But basically, you look at all these three fronts, neither here nor there.
Okay. Talk a bit about what's going on, if anything, between America and Israel, more specifically between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. There was a lot of, backslapping, from about a year ago, from last June up until a few weeks ago, about how intertwined they were, completely in agreement. Israel was the junior partner, but Trump was leading, and their goals and aims were totally aligned. Regime change, which Trump kind of withheld that comment for some time, but eventually then he started his back and forth. Yeah, I'm for regime change. No, it's not our goal. Well, yeah, it would be kind of great if we did it. But regime change and totally eviscerate any Iranian nuclear capability. Israel's interests, of course, have always been somewhat broader, with the intention of also degrading the Iranian ballistic missile capability. I think that the United States has been less concerned about that on an ongoing basis, and understandably so. So, where are things at? Because we see signs of friction, or let's say lack of alignment. We've been hearing much less from both of them about what pals they are and how everything is going along swimmingly. So what are you hearing and thinking?
No, there's definitely tension right now between Jerusalem and Washington. What's very telling, for example, is Netanyahu's silence. He's not talking about it, right? Donald
Mhm.
Trump, on the other hand, is talking every day and tweeting and posting about the deal and when he will decide and what he will decide. And he's increasing his demands and the conditions. And they're quite clear, right, from Donald Trump's perspective. The Strait of Hormuz has to be wide open without any conditions, without the Iranian toll booth. They have to give up the 450, 460 kilos of high enriched uranium. There has to be a freeze on the enrichment of uranium. And there it will then be an unfreezing of funding and billions and tens of billions of dollars that will then make their way to the Iranians, and then potentially also a lifting of a lot of those sanctions. Israel is obviously concerned for a number of reasons. Number one is, and this is probably the first and foremost, this wasn't the result that we wanted when embarking on this war. The objective at the time was the total elimination of Iran's nuclear program, a potential toppling and collapse of the regime. But instead of either of those happening, the regime is still intact and maybe even stronger today than it was before. And it's about to be totally legitimized by the Trump administration by potentially reaching a deal with them. So now they are ironclad in place. And even with the removal of the enriched uranium, and even with the 20-year freeze on enriched uranium, at the end of the day, it's a freeze, right? So they'll wait 15, 20 years. They'll wait for the next president to be replaced.
Right.
This has always been the Iranian method of waiting and having patience. I mean, what people need to remember about Iran, the Persian people are a people of thousands of years, right? This is a regime that's only been here for 48 years. They'll wait a little longer and then eventually they'll get to what they want to get to. But the idea is obvious, and this is clear. Any Iranian leader today understands that if they had a nuclear weapon on February 28th of this year, they never would have been attacked by the United States or the state of Israel, right? So how could you not then try to get your hands on a nuclear weapon? And you combine all that together, this is not what Israelis or the Israeli government wanted. With that said, the question is, okay, but we're here now, right? Whether we like it or not. Now, how do you make some lemonade out of the lemon? And that's kind of where I think the Israeli government is right now. So can Netanyahu and his government make sure, for example, that the deal at least has some conditions that are of paramount importance the removal of the enriched uranium, the freeze on the enrichment, buy time as much as possible. Ballistic missile restrictions, you're not seeing any of that. Proxy restrictions, funding to Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, and others, you're not seeing any of that either. And it's likely not going to be there. So Israel right now is, let's keep quiet, not fight publicly with the president, see what we can get done. I'll add in another piece to the pie, which is, keep in mind, Israel has to begin negotiating. It would have started already, right? Had it not been for the war, but it definitely needs to start now, talking to the administration about the renewal of a new MOU, a new memorandum of understanding of military aid. And while the Israeli prime minister told 60 Minutes a couple weeks ago, I want to wind it down to zero, what he really said is, I want to wind it down to zero within 10 years. That's the exact time frame of a new MOU. So he wants to get one more MOU out of this president. And if you fight with him too much, you could ruin those chances. So what you might want to do is suck it up, understand that you're going to get a shitty deal from your perspective, but then use that as leverage to get a better MOU out of the president. So it could be that's where Israel is also thinking right now.
Well, I'll recall a few weeks ago, Trump was asked in one of his, everyday news conferences, free for alls in the Oval Office. He was asked about, what's your kind of strategy if you do topple the regime even? And he said kind of like, I don't know, like we had a bunch of people on our list and like they're all gone now. We,
Right.
took them all out. But one of those individuals that apparently was seriously being considered to be the new head of Iran, Ahmadinejad, who we all recall as the somewhat unhinged, even for Iran, president. He had a long tenure. I don't remember exactly when and how long. Like all of them, Holocaust denier, rabid anti-Zionist,
Called for
anti-Semite.
Israel to be wiped off the map multiple times.
Right. And apparently this is true. What do you hear about the Ahmadinejad?
This whole plan, which was revealed in a report in the New York Times, that the Israeli plan to oust the regime was actually to replace the leadership with Ahmadinejad, and that's why his home in the initial day of the bombing and when the attack began on February 28th, his home was also reported to have been attacked. But really, it said that the attack was against a guard post outside his home because he was under watch by the IRGC, by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which was strange because he had traveled, I think, at least once or twice to Budapest
Mhm.
in the preceding year or two. So exactly what type of house arrest he was under is unclear. The fact that this terrible individual is the person that someone in Israel thought was the right guy to replace the Ayatollah with, it's very strange. Can't speak to the veracity of the report. But what I can say is just my personal opinion for what it's worth. If this was the plan, it sounds half baked to me. Doesn't sound, I mean, like, here's what we know about the regime change component, right? Because what people now in the rewrite of history, which often happens in these
Mm.
cases, everyone is like, no, we never called for regime change, right? Well,
Right.
see, the problem is some things can't be erased, right? So, for example, Donald Trump on the morning of February 28th, wearing his baseball cap, gave a speech. And in his speech, he said, and to the Iranian people, your time will come soon when you will have the opportunity to take to the streets and seize, I'm not saying this verbatim, but this was pretty much how he said it, and seize control of your country. Wait, Benjamin Netanyahu made similar statements. And then, even a few weeks into the war, went live on a video and said to the Iranian people, wait, your time is coming very soon. Soon you are going to be called upon. So that's not called upon what? I mean, yeah, to go try to seize the regime. So we wanted regime change. The Americans wanted regime change. Somebody convinced somebody that regime change was possible. And it seemed that the plan, based on what we know, was A, Ahmadinejad, B, was the Kurds. Now,
Right.
both of these stories don't really come together well. So to me, it sounds a little amateur hour here in this idea of what we thought we could engineer in Iran. And I know I talk to people in the government and in the army and in the Mossad who will tell me, you still got to wait and see the regime, the economy is collapsing, this and that. And, on the other hand, here's what we do know. When you're dealing with a regime like Iran that is willing to do anything to stay in power, including massacre its own people. Breaking Ahmadinejad out of house arrest is not going to be enough to bring down the regime. Sorry, right? It's just not. It's not going to work. And I think that we just have a situation here where whoever these experts are on Iran, because I mean it's not you or me, but there's got to be people who are inside the government who are really like they know the Iranian society and culture and people. I don't know.
I want to pick up on that thread because it was great. You referred to the plans as they may have been, based on what we think we know, as being half baked, as being kind of amateur hour. And a couple of things. I don't know if you caught an interview with Christiana Manpour on CNN and Danny Citrinowicz from the INSS, former
No.
Mossad official.
But
Well,
I
then
have been reading what Danny's been writing and seeing him on Israeli television. Yeah.
okay. So I mean, Danny's basically saying and said to Christiana Manpour exactly what you just said. It is amateur hour. It is half baked. They're not thinking things through. Whatever plans there may even have been at the beginning involving Kurds or Ahmadinejad or whatever else were not thoughtful and careful. I think that's a fair characterization of his comments. So is he kind of an outlier, a rogue among the Israeli commentariat in making these comments, or is he kinda in the zone?
I mean, listen, in Israel, a lot of this will often fall on partisan lines, right?
Right,
Which creates for an unfortunate reality. So it's difficult always. You could say, oh, Danny, he's anti Bibi, let's say,
right.
right? Or something like that. But I think that when you look at a lot of the commentators, right? And Michael Milstein, another one who I have respect for, was reading something he wrote just over the weekend. He's at the Dayan Center, former colonel in the IDF, Arab affairs expert. I mean, everyone touches on the same problem over and over again. Is that, and this is how I look at it, is the overarching issue, Vivian, is that we don't have any political strategy, political vision. Now, I don't mean political in the politics sense of,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Knesset. I mean, we don't know, we only carry with us a sword today. We are the super Sparta that Benjamin Netanyahu spoke about last September when describing what Israel. Now, even if he didn't mean it that way, that's what Israel has become. It's the
Yeah.
constant fighting, it's the constant warfare. And there's no other consideration for something else. So with Lebanon, there are these talks that are taking place between our ambassador in Washington, the Lebanese ambassador in Washington. They're not doing anything, right? Since that ceasefire went into effect, what was it, April 12th or 15th, whenever it was, we've had already, I think, 11 soldiers, 12 soldiers that have been killed just from the FPVs, the first person view drones, right? We've had dozens who have been wounded. The rocket fire on Israel is only increasing. The destruction in Lebanon is only increasing. And this is under a ceasefire, right? Imagine if there wasn't a ceasefire. So, I mean, the idea today in Israel is you go to somebody and say, okay, how are we going to end this? No one knows. We need to fight more. What do you mean? We're only in control 50% of Gaza, go to 70%. So with Iran also, you bombed Iran. What did you think was going to happen? What was going to come? You eliminated, as Trump joked, we took out maybe too many guys, right? I mean, but what did you think was going to happen, right? And I just don't know. Now, I think here's the thing, right? Because I don't want to sound just negative, but there are people who are probably listening to this and saying, Yaakov and Vivian don't know what they're talking about. Of course, the government thinks about these things. Of course, they do. There's real responsible people who are sitting there. Unfortunately, I think we do kind of know what we're talking about. And unfortunately, they don't think about these things. This is exactly
And
the problem, right?
and let me jump in there because it's just been on the tip of my tongue for almost this whole conversation. This is totally reminiscent of October 7th,
Correct.
where we make these assumptions. Of course, they're thinking about it. Of course, they're on top of it. Of course, they know what's going on. And we saw what happened. And it was a series of coincidences? No, it was a series of, some might use the word negligent missteps, conduct,
Totally.
um, and again, here we are with pretty much the same cast of characters in the decision-making positions, prime among them being Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
No, I
And,
mean, yeah, no, look,
I mean, it's just unreal.
100%. Yeah.
And David Barnea, someone who I have high regard for. And he was the head of Mossad pre-October 7, and he still is. Most of the rest have been kind of cleaned out and replaced with arguably far less effective and qualified people to hold the jobs. Top among them, I would point out the incoming chief of Mossad, who is going to replace Barnea if that actually happens. But isn't this an October 7th moment again?
I mean, it's an October 7th moment because, well, to some extent, people look at it and on the surface, what do you mean? We've learned the lesson, right? We initiate, we're not just reactive, we're not containing the threat, we're going after the threat. True. However, we're repeating the same tactics over and over again, hoping for a different result. So when we took over, when we finished the war in Gaza came to an end with the ceasefire of October, the hostages came back and the board of peace was established. Since then, nothing has moved. So now we're almost a year in. What's the solution? Take over more territory, more destruction, more fighting. Why will that change anything? In Lebanon, it's the same thing. In Iran, in Israel, the only answer is, well, let's hope the ceasefire talks collapse so that there will be another strike. And let's say that's the right move with Iran specifically. I happen to want, actually, for the ceasefire talks not to succeed and for the Iranians to get hit a little more because hopefully that'll get a better deal. But here's the point. Even if that happens, what are you hoping will happen? A better deal. So you know you're ending with a deal. Now it's just a question of, can you get a better deal or are you going to be stuck with the shitty deal? But either way, it's a deal. So the same tactic, different result. It doesn't work, guys. It doesn't. You need to change the tactic. You need to start to think of other ways to potentially deal with these challenges and these threats. And that you see none of. Absolutely no creativity at all.
I mean, I would respond to those. They've probably turned it off by now, but those who are saying or thinking Viv and Yaakov really don't know what they're talking about. It's Israel. Of course, they're ahead of the eight ball. Of course, they know what they're doing. And I would say, look around. We're flying by the seat of our pants. We have the government telling the residents of the North who are getting absolutely hammered, as hammered as Tel Aviv was at the height of the post-October 7th war and the Iran episodes. And the government keeps saying, we have a ceasefire. What are you talking about? I watched on TV last week residents saying, the government ignores us. No one comes to see us. Even top brass in the army are avoiding coming to see us. They're living an absolute hell, but it's even worse now because their government and the IDF won't even acknowledge it. I mean, this is beyond surreal. And I think that you and I live the dream every day and see it all around us, how yes often does mean no and no often does mean yes. But there's this very haphazard feel to the way decisions are being made and implemented. So let's work with that and go to the West Bank for a moment, shall we?
Sure.
We've had some really ugly scenes, maybe ongoing events in the West Bank since October 7th. It seems that the kind of frequency of lawlessness is changing and becoming far more frequent, almost constant, perhaps, in some areas. Used to be something that was kind of really out of the ordinary, but occurred where you had Jewish settlers, often young, attacking Palestinians. There just seems to be a constant flow of reports of attacks. They're not always kids. They're older sometimes. They're settlers, people who live in settlements in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. It seems that they're never arrested. They're never detained. Nothing happens. What's going on in the West Bank?
You know, the West Bank is a stain on every Israeli. Let's be honest for a moment. It really is. Because this government, this police force, this IDF, and this Shabak are allowing these hooligans to run freely throughout the West Bank. And to almost every single night, this is happening. Going into villages, stealing sheep, killing animals, burning cars, burning trees, burning homes, whatever it is, graffiti, just terrible. There's a video of a guy going into a cave near Hebron, where in the South Hebron Hills, where there's some Palestinian Bedouin who live inside some of these caves. Video just shoving a woman on the ground, then beating a dog. I mean, like, these are animals. And this is not I mean, if we can find the needle in the haystack in Iran or Lebanon or Gaza and kill these bad guys, we can't find 50, 100, 200 of these hooligans and throw them into jail. I mean, like, so what we understand as a result, because we do know what this country is capable of when it wants to, is that this is a political decision. And because it is a political decision, that's why it's a stain on all of us, because we allow it to continue to happen. This isn't an operational challenge. This isn't something that is beyond our capabilities. These are people who are sitting and saying, we're going to turn a blind eye. And by turning a blind eye, what they're doing is causing Israel irreparable damage. There is no way. I said to someone the other day from one of the, Hezbollah organizations, the ones, the pro, don't even try, because there's
Yeah.
nothing to say. No, it's not you can say there's only whataboutism. Well, they're terrorists. I mean, so what? No. And what the thing that we used to be able to say, Vivian, of our society's against it. We have rare examples. We have, every
Yes.
society has its rotten weeds, but as a culture, as a people, we're opposed to it. We're against it. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of still true, and it used to be very true, but today, I don't know. I mean, when the government allows it to happen, are we really against it? Is it really against our culture? Is it really the outlier of society? I don't know anymore, to be honest.
Okay, and
And
I'm so glad you took me right to where I want to go. Because when we spoke about this a few weeks ago, and many people have been kind of lapsing into this explanation response, it was always, oh, it's a fringe. You referred to them as hooligans. I like thugs. It's my
terrorists, whatever the term is.
whatever. They're bad people. But it's always, I believe, I'm quoting you more or less directly, that, 99% of the people living in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria are law-abiding, fine people and don't support this kind of activity. And so I have to ask the question, in your view, is it a fringe? Is it really a kind of, a rogue, small group of outliers, which is what we've been told and have chosen to believe as a society for many years? Or is it in fact much more widely accepted?
It's a fringe within the larger settler population, right? Most of the residents of Judea and Samaria, of the Israeli settlements or communities in the West Bank, are law abiding, tax paying, military serving Israeli citizens like you, like me. There is a group among them that are just a few hundred people here who are carrying out these attacks, who are carrying out these crimes. And maybe, yes, they do have the spiritual, political support of a larger group than just those few hundred. The problem is to just say it's a fringe, though, ignores the fact that within the Israeli cabinet, within the Israeli government,
Yeah.
there are particularly two ministers of great influence over Benjamin Netanyahu and over the direction of this country who are giving them complete support almost. And
And
that is
those two ministers are Minister of National Security, which is a bit of a paradox, Itamar Gvir, and Minister of Finance, Bezalel Smotrich. These two key ministers in the government, and that's the perfect segue to what we're going to discuss before closing, which is the domestic political issue of the day. Everybody outside of Israel, I think inside Israel, people are just exhausted. It's like, okay, we have an election that has to be held by October 27th. The Haredim, the ultra-orthodox, pulled the plug. They went to their instructing rabbi and said, Bibi has told us, this 2, 3 weeks ago, Bibi has told us that he will not pass the legislation legalizing our exemption from the draft for all time. And the Rabbi Lando, said, okay, pull the plug. Let's dissolve the Knesset. That happens. And now there is wrangling over the date of the election. I have no idea technically how that works. I'm not sure that I want to, but I think we can tell our listeners that the preferred date for the ultra-Orthodox seems to be September 1st. The preferred date for Netanyahu, as always, is to drag the pack to the last possible date that the election can legally be held, and that's October 27th. Why September 1st? Because every year in August, all of the ultra-Orthodox yeshivas are shut down for a 3-week break. Many ultra-Orthodox families travel outside of Israel, travel within Israel. But by the end of August, they are back at it full time. So their voters are around. Less true of other demographics. And of course, as well, they want the vote taken care of before the high holiday period begins, which I think Erev Rosh Hashanah, beginning of the whole New Year period, is September 11th this year, and then it goes to October 8th, 10th, 11th, something like that. So that's this current struggle. The domestic struggle is, when will the election be held? And who does Benjamin Netanyahu need if he has a hope of forming a coalition again? More than anyone, he needs Ben Gvir and Smotrich.
Exactly. I mean, there's a few pieces to this puzzle, right? One is, yeah, the government's coming to an end. It's anyhow coming to an end because elections have to be held by October 27th, right? That is the by law date. The reason it's coming to an end potentially earlier, and this week there will be a vote in the Knesset to begin to advance the legislation to disperse the Knesset, is because the ultra-orthodox have finally, if they played stupid until now, they're no longer playing stupid, but they all understood what we all understood months ago, which is that Benjamin Netanyahu is not going to be able to give them the bill that they wanted to be able to avoid the military draft. Number one, because of the pending election. So he doesn't want to, be seen as doing that. But number two is he might not even have the votes, right? Within the Likud party, there's a number of rebels. Within the religious Zionist party, there are a number of rebels as well. And therefore, he might not even have the votes. So as a result, he finally basically told them, sorry, guys, not going to be able to pass that law. And they said, in that case, one of their rabbis, 90 something years old, Landau, said, okay, we're pulling out. And since then, the snowball has been, rolling towards the legislation that's already started to pass in preliminary reading. Now will be the first reading this week. But at that point, when you are bringing the bill forward, you have to, at the last vote, which would be the second, third reading, you have to give a date of when you want this election to be held. So that will be made in coordination. There's apparently, from what I hear, Netanyahu would like to get to October. He would ideally want to get as far away as possible, buy as much time, mainly because it just gives more time, is more maneuverability. And with the lack of resolution on every single front, maybe by October, you'll have some situation in Iran that you'll be able to say, okay, we got the success that we wanted, or somewhere else. The ultra-Orthodox want it earlier, and the dates that are being thrown around is the 1st of September, which is problematic because it's the first day of school for people in this country. Another option is the 15th of September, which is in the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The 8th of September exists as well, but as you go further into September, you start to run into the Chagim, and then it's dead. So there's no way it can be held then, and then you get into October already. We'll wait to see
Let
what
me
the
jump. Okay, so I have to make this point,
Right.
because what I'm hearing, understanding, 8th and 15th of September aren't really great, but yes, they're possibilities. One of the things that's really significant about September 1st is, as you said, it's the first day of school, and schools in Israel are the main locations for ballot boxes. That's go to cast their votes. And again, the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, seem oblivious to the level of chaos and disruption. First day of school is always fun for everyone, right? Especially parents.
Right.
And on top of it all, you're going to have the ballots in the schools. So you're going to delay the first day of school because there's just no way around that, right? You can't have both going on simultaneously, not for the first day. And they just don't care. They're so detached from the way in which 85% of the people live that they don't care that it's the first day of school. I find it extraordinary.
Vivian, they don't care. They don't care about any of this. Like, listen, anyone who cared about the people of Israel would
Yes.
not have tried to pass a law last week that was going to give a subsidy to, because basically what happened, just to give 1 second the background in one word, because there's no draft law, according to Israeli law, you can't give a subsidy to a Haredi family, to an ultra-Orthodox family whose father is avoiding the draft. So what the government tried to do, what the coalition tried to do, is pass a workaround that the subsidy would be determined not by the father who's avoiding the draft and not working, but by the mother. And it's an abomination, right? In other words, they're trying to give a subsidy for kindergartens, by the way, kindergarten subsidy, not to the families whose husband, whose father or mother has been serving 500, 600 days, 300 days over the last 2.5 years of reserve duty. Why should they get a subsidy? We're going to give a subsidy to the families whose parents do not carry the share of the national burden. If you cared about the Israeli people and you
Yeah.
cared about their interests, you would not do stuff like that. So, with all due respect, you think they care about September 1st, right? They care about one thing. What date is going to be the best for them, that they will have the greatest turnout of their people and the greatest chance that they can win or at least deny the other side a victory? That is the consideration. And there are real considerations here, right? Because September 1st, maybe first day of school, if that still goes ahead, do people vote in the same way? If not, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, yeshivas are learning, students are in yeshiva, more control over the Haredi vote. I mean, there's a lot of different considerations. Like Aryeh Deri, for example, is said to be, I've read this, is said to be a proponent of the 15th of September for that
Yes.
exact
Yes.
reason, right? So when you hear that Aryeh Deri or Moshe Gafni or Benjamin Netanyahu want a specific date, you better think why they want that date, because there's a damn good reason that's the date they're choosing.
So I want to just make this point because you do a lot of media outside of Israel, as do I, and we speak to people all over the place. What I'm noticing is this really intense interest in the coalition between, or the merging of the two parties of Bennett's unnamed party and Yair Lapid's Yesh Atid. About a month or so ago, they announced we're merging, we're becoming Yachad. We're naming our party Yachad, which is together going forward. And there was a stir for, I don't know, a few hours maybe in Israel. And then it's like, whatevs. It's too early for this kind of election jockeying. It was weird. And I don't think that, based on my interactions in Israel, people are overly excited about it. As you and I both know, Gadi Eisenkot, who chose not to merge with those two leaders, as he said, I will never, be number two to Bennett's number one. And he's actually sort of surging.
Surging is not a wrong term, I would say.
So
Yeah.
he's surging in the polls. Bottom line is, it's early June. It's like a decade away in Israeli terms from the election. And what would you say to people who, mostly in my experience outside of Israel, are very focused on this and asking, how are Bennett and Lapid doing? How is their coalition going to work? What would you say? How would you assess it?
Well, I think they pulled the trigger prematurely, right? The merger that they made between themselves is not working out the way they thought it would be. And Bennett had two main considerations, well, maybe three. Number one was he was in a real competition with Eisenkot for who's going to be the leader of the bloc. And he thought that if he merges with Lapid, and I'm putting aside Lapid's considerations, which we could talk about, but Bennett's considerations, if he merges with Lapid, he becomes the top party in the bloc, and then he cements in his leadership of the anti-Netanyahu coalition, and Eisenkot will have no choice but to fall in line. So that was consideration number one that's not working, right? If anything, it's failing because he's dropping in the polls. The last poll showed, I think he was at 22, and Eisenkot is up to 17, right? So now why is that significant also, so people understand? Because I think people see a party, they say, 1 second, he's 22, but he's not really 22. Because in the day after the election, it's two parties. They divide.
Yes.
There's Bennett's party, there's Lapid's party. So if you say 22, maybe Bennett's 12 and Lapid is 10. Maybe Bennett's 13 and Lapid is 9. Either way, Eisenkot is 17, right? So he is the leader of the bloc. He is the clear candidate to be the prime minister and the one to form the coalition, if there is a coalition to form. So that was consideration one. Consideration two was he also wanted to cement him as the main candidate against Netanyahu. But that's also not working so well. And you know what's really interesting there, Vivian, is Netanyahu is constantly attacking Bennett and the Bennett-Lapid merger. Who is Likud not attacking? Gadi Eisenkot.
Yeah.
And why are they not attacking Gadi Eisenkot? A whole separate conversation, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
And the third reason that Bennett wanted to merge with Lapid, and this is still valid and made sense, Lapid's worth a lot of money, right? Lapid has a lot of Knesset seats. Each Knesset seat is worth about $1.5 million, 2 million shekel. So you now get that money. That's how parties fund their campaigns here in Israel. You don't have super PACs. You get paid based on Knesset seats. So Bennett doesn't have money. Lapid brings a ton of money to the table. Now he's got money to play with. Either way, though, in the end result, it's not going so well. And if the trajectory does continue in this way, that Eisenkot keeps climbing and Bennett keeps declining, I don't know what Bennett will do, but Eisenkot is definitely the leader right now, the way I see it, based on the polls and the reading of it, of the bloc. The reason Netanyahu is not attacking Eisenkot is because Netanyahu sees Gadi Eisenkot as a potential partner in the day after the
Absolutely.
election,
Yeah.
right? I mean, this has to be said, and I mean, actually, I can't say it with 100% confidence because I don't know, but I think you probably would have agreed with me before the 2022 election, right? Which was the election that brought this government in, the November 22 election, that
Mhm.
Netanyahu would prefer not to have to make a government with Itamar Ben Gvir. Now, can we say the same thing today? I don't know anymore. It's hard to know where Netanyahu is and who is this new Benjamin Netanyahu. But I think if he had options, he'd rather have those options. And Gadi Eisenkot is somebody who is almost like Benny Gantz in that format of the guy who actually will put the country first. And if there is an election that ends in a stalemate and no government can be formed, and Bibi can go to Gadi and say, listen, you come with me. We kick out Ben-Gvir, right? Maybe we keep Smotrich, but we keep out Ben-Gvir. We kick out the Haredim if we have to, or maybe we keep them. I don't know. But we got to do what's right for the country. You could see Gadi going for it because Gadi's not in this to sit in the opposition.
Yeah.
Gadi's not in this to see us go to another election. I think Gadi really wants to change things. I mean, I've covered him as an officer in the IDF for about, from when he was a brigadier general up until he was chief of staff, including as a journalist. So I've had the opportunity to get to know him fairly well in that capacity. He's a good guy and he really wants to make the country better. And he's paid the ultimate price. And I think
Yes, he
so
has.
he knows what's at stake with his son and nephew. And therefore,
I just want to pause there for a moment, and because I want to fill in those blanks, because we know this, but maybe not all of our listeners do. I believe it was early December 2023. Gadi Eisenkot's only son, 25 years old, Gal, fell in action in Gaza. And shortly after, Gadi's nephew also fell. Devastating losses, of course, and the kinds of devastating losses that afflict far too many families in Israel. But as you said, Yaakov, Gadi's not in this because he's a born politician. Gadi's in this because he's determined, I believe, for the right reasons, altruistically, to fix as much as can be fixed, and
correct.
has a pretty good idea, and seems to be quite highly regarded by Israelis generally. He seems to be someone who people are willing to accept actually have integrity in this process, where I think the kind of stock of many of the other players who have been around this game for a long time, their stock price has plummeted. The October 6th guys, and that's pretty much everyone else, it's plummeted. God, he's not an October 6th politician. And I'm just going to go out with a bang, no whimpers here. I'm willing to speculate, comment, conjecture that the majority of Israelis, because, if you were, I love Venn diagrams, but if you were to Venn diagram it, it would be a complicated Venn diagram. But I think that most people would prefer to see a government without the ultra-orthodox who have just shamelessly taken the general population to the cleaners in every way over the last 4 years, and without the extremists. And I would include Ben-Gvir and Smotrich in that equation. Smotrich may be more, disciplinable in a different kind of portfolio. But I think that most people just want to live, let live, and just bring the whole temperature down. You'll recall one day, I think it was when it was in the Knesset, and Trump looked at Bibi and he made a great moment when he said about Lapid, he said, "You're the opposition guy, Bibi. He's a nice guy. I talked to him. Why are you so mean to him all the time?" And it was just a great moment of levity and everybody laughed. And he said on that day, and he said at another opportunity, "Bibi, you got to stop being so angry all the time. You won, remember?" And I think that we're coming up to 3 years since October 7th, and the fatigue is so deep in the marrow of Israelis that I do think that many would like to see a proper government, an October 8th government, not October 7th, folks. And if that means that Gadi has to go in and sit and form a coalition with Netanyahu, okay, if that's the
I think
preference.
people would go for it. Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But keep the extremists, and I include Smotrich, Ben Gvir, and the ultra-orthodox in that equation. And Benjamin Netanyahu is not looking fantastically healthy these days. We know that he has a pacemaker. We know that when his pacemaker was installed a few years ago, we were told that he'd been out on a boat on the Sea of Galilee that day, and geez, forgot to bring water and a sun hat and got dehydrated. And then we found out later that a pacemaker was installed that evening. But the country wasn't notified. We also know that he has been treated very recently for cancer. We're told it's stage 1. Not so sure. That cancer kind of popped up as well a few years ago. He is 76 years old. He's under tremendous stress. And frankly, he looks like hell. I mean, I would too in his circumstances, but I believe he's got some rather serious health problems on top of it all. I understand that he was rushed to the hospital a few nights ago to see a dentist. That sounded a little unusual to me, and I have to say I do hope it's an abscess tooth, or something, but it could be something much more serious that we're not being told.
I mean, there's a big question, right? Which I think we don't really know the answer to. And that is Benjamin Netanyahu really going to run in this upcoming election? And there's a number of reasons to think he will, and there's a number of reasons to think he won't. The first reason to think he will is because he knows that if he's not in this role, the chances that he goes to jail for the trial that he's on increase exponentially. And therefore, his whole strategy until now has been hold on to the job, stay in the seat as long as possible. And from that position, you have a greater chance to find your way out of the trial. But the reasons that he might not are because A, health, age, polls are not shining or, they're smiling at him right now. And therefore, if he doesn't have a way to win, should he maybe cut his losses now? And how would he do that? Is he would make a deal. I
Exactly.
step down, I go home, case closed, I get pardoned by the president. That could be something that's in the works, and you're hearing a lot about it on the periphery. There are people talking about this as an option. There's no indication that's where he is, but I would not be surprised if that happens, because I do know one thing, and that is that Netanyahu learned from Ehud Olmert, right? When Ehud Olmert was prime minister back up until 2009, Olmert resigned prior to a decision to indict him because he respected the process and the rule of law and the police investigation. Olmert went to jail. He's an ex-con, right? I mean, it has to be said. But he decided to step down even before that. Olmert looks back and says, wow, what a sucker I was, right? I should never have resigned. But Bibi looks back and says, I can't do what Olmert did. Olmert went to jail because he didn't fight to stay in the job. So each one learns a different lesson. But I think that Bibi might be at the point that he's nearing, that he says, if I don't have a way to win, go home and get this behind you. And that's a question that we still won't know for some time.
So, for our listeners, I hope that somewhat addresses all the questions about who's going to win and who's going to form the coalition, and this endless speculation that who is there but Bibi. There's a lot up in the air. And Yaakov, always interesting and a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much again for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here. I will be coming back to you this week with written and podcast drops. So stay tuned and have a safe week. We love hearing from you. So please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to Vivian@stateoftelaviv.com. That's VIVIAN @stateoftelaviv.com. And if you go to our website, stateoftelaviv.com, you can find the subscribe button and take it from there. Hope that you do that. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Jan Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager who pitches in on everything. Thank you, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team, and thank you, listeners, for being here. Until next time, stay safe.